This skill drastically transformed my podcast. It's not speaking, it's copywriting. Copywriting completely changed the game for me. Here's why. My podcast titles went from dull and mediocre to catchy and clickable. My social media posts went from crickets to listener conversion machines. My show notes went from vague to optimized for keywords. My podcast intros went from spontaneous to well thought out attention grabbers. I honestly believe that copywriting is one of the secret sources to podcasting. I actually even think it is more important than speaking. I know that that's controversial, but speaking can be edited out and you can actually script your introductions and your questions and the way you speak on your podcast and make it sound natural. You can write it, and that comes down to copywriting. Here's how to improve your copywriting skills to transform your podcast. So what I did was I looked at other successful copy. So copywriting is literally words that sell. That's it, really. It's different from content writing. Copywriting is making someone read and feel an emotion to make them take an action. So when you create amazing titles on your podcasts that someone wants to click on, the content could be completely rubbish, but if you've made a really clickable, catchy, hooking title, then you've literally got over half the battle, which is making someone click on your podcast in the whole first place. So look at great copy. Go through Spotify or Apple Podcasts and look at titles which grab your attention. Usually they're titles which have a number that's very specific or an emotion in there. I'm going to give you some examples of podcast titles that have worked very well on my podcast and the top 3 episodes statistics wise. So one episode that's really popular on my podcast is Performance Anxiety as a Top Lawyer, The Dangers of Law Firm Culture. So this is clickable because it's like shocking. It's kind of controversial. It's like, what? Lawyers can have performance anxiety and it might be due to culture. It's like so many different feelings that are being felt when you read this, and it grabs your attention. Another popular episode is called Law Firm to Thriving Freelance Lawyer, The Secrets to Success. So again, you're tapping into an emotion, the secrets. That means it's things that people don't necessarily know about. And going from a law firm to being a freelance lawyer, that's a little bit controversial. So people are like, what? That's possible? And they're intrigued, and it taps into this, emotion of intrigue. Another episode that worked really well, another episode title is The Truth About Being a Big Law Partner, Time for Change. So again, the truth, it's something that is unspoken, something that we might not know about, and that adds intrigue. So I found the most popular titles, podcast episodes, are the ones that really make people think, oh, I wonder what they're talking about there. I want to know more. So I would suggest looking at what grabs your attention and not copying, but using it as inspiration. Maybe you can put together a swipe file. What's a swipe file? Well, it's basically a file where you put together inspirational things. So screenshot titles and put them into a folder or notes on your phone or whatever. I personally screenshot and put it into a folder on my computer. This is a great way to grab inspiration when you're not sure what to do. Another way you can do it is by getting a really good title, putting it into ChatGPT and saying, create 10 titles like this. This is a hooking title. Create titles like this about this type of podcast, and it will come up with different titles and you can mix and match and swap it around. So that's a really good way to do it. Podcast intros. Now, when you're listening to a podcast, you want to be hooked within the first 3 to 7 seconds. People lose interest after this point. So if they're hooked and they're hooked at every point, then it's more likely that they will continue listening till the end. So you want to make sure your introduction is very, very hooking, and you want to make sure you write this and that it's not just spontaneous off the top of your head, or it's not like, today I'm interviewing this person, we're going to talk about this. You want to tell the listener why they need to listen to this episode and make them understand that they're going to be getting a lot of value or inspiration or education or entertainment from this particular episode. And you need to put that specifically in a hooking and emotive way into the introduction. When I say emotive, I mean use words emotion driven, like I mentioned in the titles, the secret to, the truth about, that makes people think, I want to listen more. So this is a really great way to hook your listener straight away. The show notes is another way to hook the listener, make them want to listen. Sometimes people, when they're not sure about whether to listen to a podcast episode, they might look at the description of the episode and say, is this really worth my time? And in the first few lines, again, it needs to be a hook. It needs to be something that will draw them in and make them want to listen further, because it's touching on emotions, or perhaps it's scarcity, or it's intrigue. You want to tap into their emotions. After that, you want to start using and dropping in keywords. So you want your podcast to be searchable. So again, look at other podcast descriptions and see what they're saying, and use it as inspiration to write your podcast descriptions. And think about, what are people going to be searching for? So if you're talking about a digital nomad, lawyer, traveling around and working, then people who are searching for that type of episode are going to be typing in words like digital nomad, lawyer, travel and law, freelance, these different words. So you want to drop those in, but also make sure that the language that you use is selling the podcast. You're not just explaining or describing it, you are selling it to the reader. And that is what copywriting is. I strongly believe that without copywriting, or without copywriting skills, and I've actually done a few copywriting courses, so I understand the base of what you need for copywriting, how to engage the reader or the listener. And I really think that it is the key to a successful podcast, honestly. Without my copywriting skills, my podcast would not be as successful as what it is. That is the truth. Now, I purposely didn't include information about how I use copywriting in social media to make the content a listener conversion machine. I'm going to talk about that in another episode. So if you're intrigued about how to use copywriting in social media to get more listeners, to get an audience, to build a massive audience, stay tuned and put your questions in the comments, because I'd love to know what you think about that and what you want to know about that. I've used copywriting to build an audience for my podcast, hands down. You can do the same.